Hi, everybody. My name is Aram Melkoumov, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Crowdlinker. Thank you for joining me. I'm the host of Crowdlinker's Corporate Innovation Series. We have here today Kin Chung from MPower Financing, who is going to be participating in today's episode. Thank you so much for joining. Kin, nice to have you.
Yes, likewise. Nice to be here.
I'm going to quickly tell you a little bit about Crowdlinker, what we're doing with this fireside chat series, and then intro you into the topic that we have today, and then go into introducing our guest and getting into the juicy conversation that we're going to have with Kin today. So I'm really excited. Thanks for being here as well. So quick pitch on Crowdlinker. Crowdlinker is an award-winning digital product design and engineering studio. We work with companies of all sizes, small, medium, large enterprises, and we help them on ideation, validation, design, and building everything from proof of concepts, POCs, to MVPs and full production designs and builds. And so today we have Kin joining us, and the topic that he's participating with us on is high growth startup lessons for corporate innovators. And reason why we're doing this fireside series as well is so we could fill that gap, that void that we feel is missing in the market around getting true insight coming from innovators at different organizations around what it takes to actually build innovation within their organizations. And so Kin today is going to be talking about his journey from enterprise to startup, contrasting his experience working in the innovation department of small and large organizations, and offer tips on keeping his team focused during the pandemic. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Kin Chung. Kin is the Vice President of Credit Innovation at MPower Financing. Quick housekeeping, be sure to check out our corporate innovation episodes that we're going to have on our YouTube page, and follow us on LinkedIn to get access to more exclusive contents. Let's get started. Kin, thank you so much for being here. I want to start off the first question with you by asking about, like innovation specifically in the last kind of 4 fireside chats that we've had. What we've seen from other innovation leaders transitioning from startup to large enterprises, you kind of had that reverse approach. So you've moved from large organizations to heading corporate innovation at a startup, a scale-up. Can you tell us a little bit about your previous roles working within large organizations to give us some context?
Yeah, sure. I started off, first position was at Capital One, initially on the business side. And over time, I rotated through multiple functional areas, including credit risk management, finance, and as well as economic capital. One of the highlights actually of my time there was I was part of the business team that developed the 9.9% super prime credit product, credit card product. This was actually very new at the time. Credit cards were all like one size fits all, high interest rates. But Capital One decided to experiment and try something a low rate that was attractive enough, try to keep customers instead of them just rotating from credit card to credit card. And part of the team that made it work, so really exciting times there. And I learned a lot through that process. After Capital One, I joined Fannie Mae, initially in a credit role, leveraging my experience from Capital One. But then around the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, I was given an opportunity to join the ABS portfolio group. They said, hey, we like how quickly you can learn things. Would you be interested in doing this? Despite having no experience. That was the most glamorous industry at the time in finance. I didn't realize how quickly it was going to blow up, but at the time you couldn't say no to an opportunity like that. So I joined, and during my tenure there, that was probably my longest tenure in any particular role, one particular role. But I got to see all the innovations that in financial engineering that they were coming up with, with product and securitization combinations. They were creating that almost like monthly. There was always something new coming out in the market. But it all blew up, and in the aftermath of the financial crisis, we had to create all these new processes. We were set up as an investor in AAA highly rated securities, but then at the end of that, we had a portfolio with a lot of junk bonds in them, rated junk, and we had to learn how to manage these at scale, something nobody else in the industry has to deal with. but having been staffed up only as a AAA investor. So that was kind of very interesting. And, I saw that time out, and as things were beginning to wind down, I looked around. And as luck would have it, I was recruited to join AIG, help build up what was called the science team at that time. They wanted to bring cutting edge analytical techniques, like they were very common in financial services, but they wanted to bring it to insurance. So that was a very interesting role for me. I decided to join that. But they hit some cost constraints. The costs were going up too quickly in the company overall. And then that led to some reorganizations, and the structure wasn't that good wasn't that suitable for me anymore. But again, I got lucky. At that time, Fenway Summer, which was a new startup that was backed by the former acting director of the CFPB, they were creating this group and wanted to launch a couple of financial services companies. So there was a good opportunity there in credit. I joined them and got spun off into a couple of companies there. Eventually, I ended up at MPower Financial, which is where I am now. This is a public benefit corporation, and we provide educational financing for global citizens.
Awesome! Wow, it's a really impressive career you've had working at some amazing companies. And I want to ask, what made you transition going from large enterprise to a startup, a scale up, and what made you want to continue working? What made you not want to continue working at some of the large organizations?
Yeah, I actually have no objections to working in a large corporation. I mean, I think both start and small have their own advantages and disadvantages. So I would say it's not so much, big versus small that is the decision maker for me, but I view it as opportunity and the fit. So, if you think about it, early in my career, I had no business background. I was previously on a purely academic track. I thought I was going to be a professor.
Oh, really?
I changed my mind before I graduated. So, I scrambled, got a job. And, if I look back now, when I first started at Capital One, I didn't know what I didn't know. There were so many business areas I had no exposure to previously. I was just learning. It was like drinking from a fire hose. So roles that were a good fit for me at that time were where I could use my analytical strengths, right? I was a mathematician, very good analytically with concepts, etc. But I really didn't know what else I needed to be aware of. So I needed the guidance of experienced business managers. And even though I could learn quickly, it's still better to have somebody who knows all these things, so you sort of have that knowledge quicker than having to learn it from scratch. So as you can see, over time, I worked in different industries within, even alongside various functional areas. So I've built up a broader knowledge and better understanding of what I know and what I don't know. And so, what makes me comfortable now working in a startup is if I make sure that they have leaders in the company that can complement my skill set, but where they have gaps that I could fill. So, since there's less unknowns for me, I feel a lot more comfortable being in a startup, and I know how to judge things better just given all that knowledge. So as I said, it's not so much big versus small. And I think it's similar with innovation also. You've got to match the opportunity with the capabilities, right? If I want to innovate to squeeze, 10 basis points of yield by building better models or a slightly better product or market it slightly better, and that makes sense if you have a large portfolio where 10 basis points, covers a big enough dollar amount that you make your money back. But that doesn't work for a small company. So, if you look at it, I have a preference to work on problems where I can make that larger change. So I want to look for less mature problems, right? Than to have to be trying to squeeze every last drop of efficiency out of a process or improve a model, like your metric area under the curve goes from 60% to 61%. I'm not that excited about that, but going from the 50 to 60%, that's really where I'd like to be.
Got it. Okay. That's really interesting. And what do you think holds, why do you think large organizations struggle sometimes with innovation or innovating? Is it like their mindset, their bureaucracy, the culture? In your experience, like, what do you think holds them back the most?
I think, like you mentioned, legacy systems is very interesting to me. And we do hear stories of that, right? Small companies, they say, oh, we didn't have a legacy system, so I could build it from scratch and do it correctly. But, there's a catch there. Once you build that version 1, you now have a legacy system. So, there could be multiple competitors, and the one you hear that built the right version 1, they were the ones who got it right. But we may not, so there's a catch there. I would love to be able to, like, say there's one thing that holds large companies back. I think it holds everybody back due to different things. Like, big companies actually have advantage that small companies don't have. For example, their financial strength, they have a balance sheet. They can tolerate more failures than a startup can.
Yeah.
I think we have a survival bias where we hear more about the startups that succeeded. But I would love to hear more from people who failed and sort of had to try several times before they succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I think smaller companies have flatter organizations, so you have more opportunity to impact the company. They're better focused. They don't have to worry about cannibalization. I think one thing that's holding back potentially, or my opinion, that's holding back securitization right now is if I want to improve, the profile of ABS or the sort of investor benefits from that, or make it more attractive. Well, if I have a large legacy book of securities, that could get devalued.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes a consideration for a big company. If I have all that legacy business, I don't really want to impact the value of that if I create a new product. So how do I protect that? Those are constraints that really, I think, limit them.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm the startup trying to steal business from them, I don't have that constraint. So,
and just out of curiosity, I mean, smaller companies, I mean, depending on how the company's structured, they typically sometimes have flatter organizations. So they could be a bit more disruptive and sometimes go after larger elephants in the space to kind of capture some market share. What do you think is like the key to innovation sometimes in those situations?
Yeah, I think, as we try new ideas, the key is really to be flexible. So what I like to call preserving optionality, right? An opportunity arises. Do we have the flexibility to move on it quickly? Right. Some big companies don't have it because they have goals for this year, they have current customers to deal with, etc. But they also have advantages and flexibility because they can finance it. So small companies have to be judicious, etc.
Right.
But they can take advantage of where they can move more quickly. I don't have a legacy book to worry about. I don't have to worry about, my previous reputation, for example. So I'm not defending, I'm attacking. So preserving that optionality. So like I mentioned, building the version 1 of a system. If I built it with flexibility so that if I have to build a version 2, I can do it quickly, then I can innovate. So it's really, what's my solution space, building the systems to fit within that solution space. And then if I find there's an opportunity outside that solution space, can I innovate quickly enough, find a workaround or something, kind of like what big companies have to do with legacy systems? How do I then accommodate the functionality I didn't consider in the first place?
Interesting. And like on that note, I mean, with when it comes to performance, how do you think performance management should be set up in a large organization to support innovation?
Yeah, that's actually difficult to do well, right? For a large corporation with so many people, you want to do things easily. So there's this tendency or temptation to use a one-size-fits-all approach, right? But if you look at business objectives, if I want to optimize a mature business, as I mentioned before, getting that 0.1%, that's very different than developing the next growth product, and that's got a very different risk profile too. If you have a large business, it's compatible with having very predictable objectives. Like you can do Six Sigma on that. If I have a small sample size, I'm innovating on a new business, looking at a few customers, Six Sigma is never going to work on that situation. Right. Timelines are uncertain. So, if you tell me, what's your objective 1 year from now? Well, I might be able to tell you, I want to get to a certain growth ratio or industry penetration, but I may not even know what the profitability is because, especially at the beginning, I had to build something twice, then I have exceeded my cost budget potentially. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. You can try to take a portfolio approach, where you innovate over a large number of projects. That's kind of what I think hedge funds do. They sort of invest in multiple companies and they win even if only 10% of those companies succeed. Unfortunately for the other 90% of the companies, they're out of a job, right? Those employees there. I don't like to do that to my teams. And I don't like to be one of the 90% within a company that fails. So, how do you make that compatible? How do you have objectives that are compatible with that while tolerating those failures? I think that's one of the challenges.
Interesting. And what about conflicting goals with BAU? Is it sometimes tough to convince business to sign off on certain things?
Yeah, I mean, so you could have conflicts, due to the innovation team having a goal, right, that conflicts with a regular business group. If I want to push through a new idea that is part of this business unit, but they're performing very well, they would be reluctant, and I've actually experienced that before. They were reluctant to make adjustments, that distract them and could impact their achieving the year-end goals, right? If they're very close to getting that next level of bonus or performance, and then I'm saying, hey, can you do this? I'm a distraction to them. And so they may not want to cooperate. So timing is also important there in terms of where the goals are. The new product or idea might actually have a cannibalization effect. So they will have to take a short-term hit to realize future gains. Again, unless they have the innovation in their objectives, they may not want to sign on to that idea because their goal is to, I got to hit this number, I want to beat it, get my bonus this year, versus, let's worry about 3 years from now, 3 years from now. So I think it's important to have cross-functional alignment of these goals. One other thing I want to throw in here is the timeline. Right? Timeline for innovation, it often exceeds the annual performance management cycle. You invest today and it may not pay back a few years later, right? So if I'm like managing a budget and quite often innovation budgets are charged or allocated to the business units. So if I'm managing the business unit, I look at that and say, you've hit me on cost 3 years in a row. Where's my profit, right? So now they start managing it like expense, cost center. And then they say, no, we're not going to put more in it until you show me some results. So they've been artificially restricting the innovation. And then when the investment begins to pay off, they're not spending that much, but this is the payoff from previous investments. And then in that year, it looks like you've got this huge return for very little spending because the timelines don't match up for the spending and the return. And then, of course, it looks really good. They're very happy. But then it can also create an unrealistic expectation going forward that you can produce this return every year.
That's right. That's right. And with innovation, I mean, there's obviously an uptick in global demand for innovation professionals, now more than ever with like everything going on with the pandemic. And so there's a lot of demand for innovation in, companies of all size. But you see a lot of people who have startup backgrounds go into innovation roles at larger organizations so that they could help them because they have that mindset, right? How do you think large organizations can make themselves more attractive towards attracting these innovation professionals and retaining them like short and long term in their organizations?
I think the attracting part is the easy one. And actually, big companies are usually very attractive to someone who's like, maybe didn't have a big budget before. Especially like, if I'm very confident, self-confident, I think I can do something new and I'm confident of success. Stepping into a large organization, doesn't seem to be that big of a challenge. I mentioned some of the larger corporate-wide, it's not so much politics, but just the dynamics within different business groups that could come into play. But then also, I think innovation has an element of risk. And there are a lot of things that we may not know exactly, right? Like if I start a new product, I don't know exactly how I'm going to market it. So it might take a bit of time to sort out and figure out what will work. But if it took me a bit longer, if I got lucky, it looks good. I think I was very smart. But if I'm a bit unlucky, then it doesn't look so good. And that's where trying to retain someone might be challenging, because if you penalize them for just bad luck, then, it's no longer an attractive position for them. As I mentioned before, right, if I have a 1 in 10, I don't really want to get my bonus 1 year every 10. I have a 1 in 10 of succeeding and I have sort of annual projects. So it's really, how do you judge someone and be able to reward them even on projects that don't really succeed? I think you can judge them on the appropriateness of the risk, right? If that risk was the right risk to take or the right decision to make, then don't judge them on the outcome, judge them on the decision. And then also, what benefit did you get from doing that? If I tried something and identified that this product, there's no demand on it right now, that is value for the company. You don't have to invest in trying to grow that business or worry about competitors in that segment unless there's a different twist on it. So there's value to the company there. And I think recognizing that type of value is important. But having said all that, I think those are very difficult things to measure. And we have a tendency or a preference to measure what's easy rather than measure what we should be measuring. And so, yeah, so I think taking the effort to define those metrics is important.
And just out of curiosity, I mean, in the organizations you worked at, what was some ways to support innovation at an individual level, like to creating a system or mindset or framework around helping some of the people in innovation role to be successful, or to not penalize them for certain, things that they do?
Yeah, I think it depends on how the innovation is coming around. Like this is a long time ago. So when I was at Capital One, innovation, at least within, as I said, within a solution space, it was very well part of the business process as usual. They were looking at doing tests all the time. They were testing all the time, different ideas, different product combinations, whatever they could modify very easily, even product features, they could test that. And sometimes they would have to develop new capabilities to accommodate that. But you're always testing. And so the overall goal was just to achieve a certain profitability level. And then how they did it, there was a lot of discretion, and they would test ideas. And the expectation is that if we test enough, we'll find the idea that works. Okay. And so they get rewarded not so much on this specific idea, but on finding some idea that's going to work. So that's where the corporate goal is more vague. But if you told me you got to make this specific product work, and that's actually one thing I don't like being at the more junior levels, when if you're assigned a particular project that you don't know whether it's going to work, that's the gamble I'm taking, and it may or may not work, and my bonus might completely depend on that. And if my manager or the executive at the top has 10 such projects, probably one of them will work and they'll get the bonus. But then as to who succeeds within the team, there's a very random element there.
So let's jump into kind of a segment where we cross-compare your experience from an enterprise experience towards more of a startup, more at a granular level, and see kind of how you encountered innovation on a day-to-day basis. So like you started talking about it, but I want to kind of go a bit deeper. Between a startup versus enterprise, how would you ideate and validate an innovation? Like what goes to the process?
Yeah, so I mentioned that it really depends, I think, on the scope, right? If it's already part of your business as usual test refine cycle, like you mentioned at Capital One, we just made those decisions at regular business meetings. We said, we tested A versus B. A was better. Let's expand the scope of the test, confirm our read, but continue testing B maybe at a smaller scale, right? So you sort of begin, like I call it a Bayesian, I think I'll describe it as a Bayesian approach, where as I get more information about something, I'll put more weight on it and then gradually confirm it. And then if it turns out I had a lucky outcome the first time, my second test would go against it, then I would scale back. So it's really just adjusting my investments as we go along. That if you did that, as part of your business as usual, you can gradually evolve your product parameters or your configurations to take advantage of what works best at that time. That's self-contained with a business unit, and almost no escalations needed for that. I've also been in a situation in a big company where we wanted to build a new system. It exceeded its current established budget for the year, so we had to go to these committees, leadership panels. We called it the Star Chamber. We had to go up to present.
Star Chamber.
And yeah, okay. It was like a very high stakes. You get 15 minutes to present your business case, and then people would sign off. And it was like sometimes perplexing to me as to what they would approve versus what they wouldn't approve. I had gone in once. They've been approving a $2 million here, $3 million there, a few $1 million there, and then I was only asking for $100,000 that year to fix one defect in an existing system we had already. I said, look, you've invested so much in the system, 100,000 is all we need to make it even more valuable to us. And then they said, no. It was like sometimes those decisions are very difficult to figure out. And I think part of that is knowing how to navigate the system, working beforehand so that when you go in, you can succeed. So being good with and having good relationship with all the other functional leads is very useful in that type of situation. So I've seen it where, as I said, you talk to very few people, get it part of business as usual. I've also seen it where you have to go in, present to this, and sometimes you get approved, sometimes you don't. Then you're on the hook. When you spend that, you better deliver this also, and then that gets added to your objectives.
So out of curiosity, how many people would you have to speak to in order to get something greenlit on an average basis? Or with your different experience?
It's the business unit, and then any stakeholders. So, you know, if it's 1, 2, 3 functional units, got to get those on board. And then we go and like the more cross-functional support you can get, and you go in to make that presentation, especially if they come in and join you to present the case, it makes it easier to get that approved. The presentation was usually to, you know, high-level executives from all over the entire larger group, like enterprise or capital markets or portfolio function at Fannie Mae. You know, you'd have probably 5, 6, 7 functions or executives there who would then weigh in on it. And then they had several advisors with them, and they had already reviewed this. So they kind of had an idea whether they liked it or not beforehand, but then they would also listen and ask some final questions, and then go through that. Then we'd hear back maybe later on that. So it could be, you know, as I said, like 10 or even a dozen high-level executives, but there's a lot of work that goes in beforehand, talking to other folks to get them. I would guess it's a bit like lobbying for legislation. You've got to get all the people on board or at different levels so that they can bubble it up also.
And so how long is the average lead time before an idea is greenlit?
Again, like, yeah, so that could take a few weeks. Like, it depends on the cycle. If I think our so-called star chamber meetings were once, I think monthly or quarterly. And if you missed this last cycle, you weren't on the agenda. And now you got to wait either the 1 month or 3 months to the next one to get the green light. And so sometimes you could do it quickly because you're at the end of that, right? So the next meeting is in 2 weeks. So, okay, we better scramble, work really hard over time, get the presentation done in the business case, get everybody on board. We can get it done quickly, but we are at the mercy of that scheduling. If it's 3 months, you know, then I got to wait there. And then if we're at the end of the agenda, but they didn't get time to come to us, oh boy, you got to wait another 3 months.
And so how would you, like, I'm just really curious, like, what do you go into this presentation meeting with the stakeholders? Like, what do you showcase in terms of, like, I don't know, ROI or metrics or reporting?
It depends on what I'm trying to do. Like, if it's a system, then it's really what it's supporting, what it's enabling, right? So the before, after, yeah, it's really the here's what the cost is and here's what's the benefit to us. It might be risk reduction, right? Like sort of risk management. So it's like we're eliminating this high severity, low likelihood outcome or a regulatory concern. So we have to address it anyway. But then you might be, how much is it worth to them to fix it also? Then can you do it with less? Looking at the alternatives, right? Especially if there's a lot of money involved. Well, did you do your due diligence? If you're getting external vendors involved, right? The vendors have to be vetted. Are they good vendors? Do they have the right clearances or certifications? Big companies are much more strict about that. And then small companies. So there's a lot of things. There's procurement looked at it, right? Because I cannot bid it out myself directly. Procurement has to run it. And so there's a lot of pre-work that might have to be done, especially if you involve external vendors. If you try to do it yourself, that's different. Or if someone signs up to do it and they sign up for a certain budget.
Really interesting. And then how do you follow up? Like, so say you get approval for an idea, you go into production or you start working on it. What are some of the metrics that you present to the stakeholders that gave the approval on like a quarterly or semi-annual or annual basis?
You know, fortunately, I didn't do too many of those. I think those were very stressful. But like we had a technology project that we wanted to put in, and then it was just giving milestones to completion. And you know, the folks who were actually building it were giving a lot of those updates. We didn't really have to go back to that group. It was more just providing updates. And to the I guess the executive who owned that, we had to get approval for budget. But then it was the executive in that group or who was sponsoring it who then held us accountable to it, because it was in their objectives, and then they were the ones giving us our performance review at the end of the year. So, you know, then my performance depended on delivering on those objectives also, as promised. But, you know, like what passes off a delivery that at the beginning, as we learn reality of the situation, as I mentioned, you might need a version 2. And then you got to review the whole cycle again if we need extra budget. So, you know, one thing I did learn is probably worth baking in budget for a version 2 as part of the initial request. And then if I don't need a version 2, I can say, hey, I beat my budget.
Yeah. And then you come up with some some room still left. So that's really interesting. But thanks
Yeah,
thanks
actually,
for sharing all that.
one of the sort of mottos we had, or the technology teams used to discuss with me, and we used to joke about it, was, saying, you better get it right the first time. You won't get a second chance at fixing any defects from version 1. So I learned that lesson.
So let's talk about that a bit more. I mean, you have a lot of experience working at large companies like Fannie Mae and others. What did you learn about innovation while there?
As I think I've alluded to it, innovations happen in so many different ways, right? I can be part of business as usual and so on, or it could be, I've had some analytical ideas that just was so convincing, I didn't even have to try to sell it. It just took over very quickly. So, it's harder to get those rather than business as usual. I think if you have a right structure, a regular structure that sort of optimizes around, what adjustments you can make. But I think, as I mentioned before, we often hear stories about that big idea that changed an industry, right? Or the visionary behind it. And then one thing that always strikes me is that person is always convinced the idea was correct. They had the right thing, they were going to succeed. And, I'm usually also, I tend to believe that probably there were a lot of other people with very similar ideas, and they also believe they were going to succeed, but we don't hear about them because they actually didn't succeed. And, I think you have previous guests who said success rate of pilot projects is about 1 in 10. And it's not always even the best idea that wins, right? There are external factors that influence the outcome. There might be influential early adopters that discovered this product first, or this company's product first, and popularized that before they found something else that might have been better. But then it's too late, you've got the network effect. Or another company figured out how to adapt the systems because everybody had legacy constraints. The idea has been out there, but nobody figured out exactly how to do it. I think, like the iPhone is a good example. I didn't actually think I needed an iPhone until they demonstrated what it could do. I said, why would I ever use a touch phone? Right? But they figured out how to get it to work and actually market it also. But anybody potentially could have won it if they moved quickly. So you've got to get there first. I think there's so many random factors. And because of that, I don't like to bet on just like, it's got to work out A, B, C, D in the sequence, and that will work. So when you ask me to give a vision, what's my vision on the future of this? I tend to be a bit vague, and sometimes it's difficult to sell that to people when it's vague. But I think I can see different possibilities of that, and you can sell the different options that could come out of this. But I cannot guarantee that is the particular iteration that we're going to end up with.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think innovation is something that you have to accept the unknowns, and you have to be flexible. You mentioned this, and have risk. Be okay with risk and having that mindset. So let's talk about now with your role at MPower. Let's learn a bit more about your innovation process there, and how do you go about building out new programs that you run from scratch?
So yeah, I mean, the secret behind my title, credit innovation, actually, is that everything we're doing is in some sense new. Our market segment is a niche. It's international graduate students primarily. So we talk about global students, but where we are most price competitive is international graduate students. And in terms of what product we're offering. So everything we do is gearing towards innovating what's be the right product for them. Adding to a certain wrinkle, right? Most student loans have a cosigner, or if you are looking at student loans from other countries, they require collateral. So in some countries, they'll put the family home next to that because studying in the US is very expensive. It's the value of a mortgage. So they'll pledge the family home as collateral. We are actually doing a product that has no collateral and no cosigners. So that frightens a lot of people, saying, how are you going to control the risk? So that's why we have to innovate. Everything is innovating because we are not underwriting it the same way. I'm actually placing a bet on students. This student has great potential. They have to achieve that potential if they're going to pay us back, because I have no collateral or a cosigner to fall back on. So we have to come up with innovations on how we identify potential. But then also, if a borrower doesn't achieve that potential, I either overestimated that potential, or there's
Interesting.
something preventing them from achieving that potential. So what is it? And then how can I help them overcome those barriers? So we have to develop processes that's very different to most lending practices. Instead of saying, you know, like if you're chasing after a delinquent borrower, it's talking about when can you pay me, etc. Well, these guys are not going to pay me if they don't have a job. So it's more of, you know, what sort of employment do you have? What are you trying? How can we help you find a job and things like that? We're building up programs like that. So we're innovating on that front, how to help borrowers, because we're investing in borrowers. So just even the approach to dealing with the borrower is different. So when you look at that, I've got processes that are new to almost all of the lending function, you know, but I still have to run the business at the same time. And I actually like that. So the innovation responsibility is falling on the same person who has to run the business as usual on a day-to-day basis. And that's how, and so we organize to do this. Everybody in the team has a, you know, like a mandate to innovate. And in order to, so we have to hire people who can innovate, but at the same time, like, you know, we're not going to hire the person who's just going to follow a script, read out, you know, here's a call script, etc. They have to be able to do that, but they also have to be able to look at that and realize we need to improve the call script in this scenario or these other scenarios. So we hire higher level, higher functioning employees to do the same role that other companies would, because we're building this from scratch. I find that's more conducive to innovation, because you know, if you work with somebody who's outside the team, we sort of have them ride shotgun for 2 weeks. That first impression is somewhat limited. They see what happens most of the time. They can give me a solution that helps me 80% of the time. But that 20%, which causes me most of my headaches and problems, they may not have seen it at all, and they don't really appreciate that if they haven't worked in that business function. That's why I think innovation works best for my situation, coming from within the business function. The person doing the work recommends how to do it, works with a technology team to come up with requirements to solve that problem. Maybe the technology team has to offer certain possibilities, but the person who has the most stake in defining the outcome knows what's, you know, problematic for them or not problematic.
So it really sounds like innovation can come from anywhere within MPower, from the from the customer support or the sales team to all the way to the technology. Is it like, how did this get created, that type of mindset? Was it like a very top-down approach from the leadership saying, okay, like, you know, everybody should have this type of mentality, where we're open to having, you know, people in the entry-level roles come up with ideas? How did that get created? And how does it flow then into like the funnel of idea all the way to, you know, build?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually include that in our corporate culture. So one of, you know, like just about typical performance management, you have your business objective, business results. Then there's some sort of soft skills that they'll measure. I think, you know, companies might call it competencies, or, you know, in MPower, we call it mindset. So we've got several mindsets that we evaluate every employee on. And one of the mindsets is boldness. So, you know, do they come up with creative ideas? Are they willing to embrace change, right? Someone who just says, no, I don't want to do something different, even though we can demonstrate analytically that most likely it's going to work better. Someone who just doesn't want to change, they're going to see that in their feedback. So we encourage people to do that. We also encourage or value collaboration. So people who are inclusive in their thinking. So if I want to solve a problem, I don't just solve the problem for myself. Let me solve it for the company. You know, so how can I influence beyond what my day-to-day needs are? And so we are encouraging employees to work together, find out about problems elsewhere, because, you know, I might have an idea that can help marketing, even though I don't work in marketing, or somebody in an operational role, customer relations, might have an idea that could help us on credit, because they observed a few things and say, you know, we get a lot of this, they always get declined. They see an observation and that funnels through to us. So we encourage and actually measure employees on how well they can integrate themselves throughout the company and be part of the whole company, as opposed to I just do my own thing and stay in my own silo.
It's really phenomenal to hear that. I mean, even at Crowdlinker, and it looks like that MPower is the same thing. You're only as good as the people that you work with, right? At the end of the day, having that type of mindset and boldness. I really like that. How, out of curiosity, how have you kept, or how has the team been motivated and focused during the pandemic? Everybody working from home. How have you encouraged that still drive and motivation to still be intact?
Yeah, I like working in credit sensitive areas because the demand for our skill is counter-cyclical, right? So during a recession, you have delinquencies and defaults increasing. So there's actually a greater demand for credit professionals during this time. And actually, the worst time to be a credit professional is when everything is going well. Like when I joined Fannie Mae in 2003, their credit-related losses and expenses that year was less than $40 million. 40 million was a fraction of a basis point. It wasn't even a basis point. It was a fraction of a basis point that year. And there's a lot of pressures, like what is credit doing? You know, losses are so low. You couldn't probably like it's the business that might get credit for it, or, what are you doing? And then you're just holding back the business if you're saying, no, we got to keep losses down, right? Because losses are so low. But when losses are high, like there's no question about it. Credit professionals have a lot of work to do. We want to bring it back under control. Mm-hmm. And when I first started, like before I went through my first recession, I said I was always jealous of these people who had 10 years experience and had recession experience. Like recruiters always say, have you been through a recession? You're not. Then they sort of view me as less valuable, thinking, come on, I'm equally smart. Why do I have to wait for a recession to prove my worth? Now on the flip side, like recession number 3 for me, I'm thinking, wow, this is great. I can now say 3 recessions. But all kidding aside, I tell my team, like, you're going to learn something that is so difficult to learn anywhere else, because you're actually going through it live, learning how to deal with it. And this is one of the biggest recessions, we've seen in a long time. And this is experience and career development that you won't get at this intensity anywhere else. We want to come out of this having the best in industry performance, and that will enhance everyone's career, because every other lender wants to know how we did it. And so far it's working out. If you actually look at some of our credit metrics, we were not as badly affected as the overall student loan industry. So, there's something with our loans that's working better, and we've actually improved the credit performance of our newest loans, the newer loans compared to the previous loans during this time. Despite the fact that just about everyone stopped lending, at least internationally, we've stopped lending as all these uncertainties are worked through. But our metrics really haven't deteriorated. In fact, it's about the same as they were a year ago, which is good given the conditions.
I think the last 6 months, I think for a lot of companies, regardless of size, with everything that's happened, it's kind of made them a bit more aggressive and motivated to find new ways to pivot or to change, or the mindset, as the business. How do you see your role changing post-COVID? Do you see any impact there? Do you think you're going to be spending more time on something else or less time? What does that look like?
I think post-COVID is going to be more of how do we continue to weather out the post-recession effects, right? Sometimes recessionary effects might take a while longer, especially for students, because the job market may come back, but there's still that previous cohort of graduates who are competing for these jobs they may not have had yet. So you got to work through this overhang of supply, right, for jobs that or for employees. So there could be some challenges for a while. So that's actually I think where my focus is going to be, is helping borrowers build out our career support platform so that we can help borrowers get an advantage. This is also a competitive advantage for us, because we get better results for the same borrower that we might originate in someone else if they're not providing that support. So it's a competitive advantage. It's difficult to copy, and so I think there is the aspect of managing and helping clean up the tail end as we come out of recession. But other than that, I think rebuilding aspects of the team, because we during post-COVID we did slow down our lending, so I got to catch up on that again. We got to rehire people or hire more people as we go back to growth. So there's going to be a fair amount of recruiting going on and growth and go there. And setting up, as I mentioned before, like, flexibility, the optionality. How do I set up processes that help me scale quickly and be able to launch new products quickly?
COVID or not, what emerging trends are you most excited about in the student learning space? And how do you think that might impact your role?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think in student lending, there's a lot of talk about trying to get to be a more efficient loan origination process. It's very archaic. Again, like anytime there's a government backstop, whether it was mortgages or student loans, if there's a government backstop, then everyone just follows the big player or the dominant market share. But if you look at it, student loan lending, like mortgages, is still somewhat behind technologically. There's a lot of paper involved. We do electronic documents now, but it's a scanned image. We get financial statements we have to review, etc. So I think the development is really along the lines of going more and more to e-lending, sort of electronic documents, but also automating that so that humans don't have to review it. They can make the judgments on it. But I don't really need people to go read a document, enter numbers, and do all that. I really want them to make the judgment. Is this a good borrower or not? And really only a judgment on the cases where it's not clear cut. There are a lot of cases where it's clear cut. We should automate all of that. So I think automating this, changing the cost structure, and then as we change the cost structure and can get to scale, we get benefits on funding, etc. And we can change our pricing points potentially, and either open up to borrowers who were previously not profitable, or even pass on some of these savings to borrowers and customers, making education a lot more accessible by reducing the cost of that.
You're really kind of hitting on a lot of points there about automation and probably robot, like processing automation, things like that. Are there any innovative projects that you could talk about, that you could share with us?
I mentioned I mentioned our support program for borrowers. We call that Path to Success. We're trying to help borrowers get on the path to success, and that actually is very ambitious overall. If you look at the long-term vision, I really don't know how it's going to end up, but we're talking about, as I mentioned, career support. Right? There's several elements to career support, whether it's coaching, resume review, job search, advice. It could even be guidance, interview preparation, right? There's a lot of different factors there. How do we build that out? There are a lot of people who play in these spaces, but it's really integrating the different capabilities other folks have already and putting into a cohesive package. That's one aspect of it. We could also have, leverage our borrower network to help each other, right? So I can build a community of borrowers that they can communicate with each other, share their insights, and help each other learn instead of trying to do it all individually and reinventing the wheel each time. We can also partner with businesses that provide either services or want to hire employees with specific skill sets. So building all these out, I think, is a big part of our innovation plans. And as I said, I don't know where that's going, but we're trying anything and everything. So throwing out a wide net there, I'm going to look at what works. And I said, like, I'll take the Bayesian approach. We'll try a few things. And you've had previous guests say you're going to fail quickly. So we'll learn what works, what doesn't work, and then make adjustments based on our learnings there and try the next thing. And where something looks promising, we will, double down on that a bit, increase our testing there until we get to a combination that works. As I said, I really don't know what combination is going to work out at the end, but keeping the whole team motivated to try everything, and working as a team, right, so that we can celebrate what we learned. This didn't work. That's a celebration, because then we don't have to think about it for a while. We can put it on the back burner, and maybe we'll find an alternative configuration in the future that works. But that should be rewarded rather than just say, oh, we failed. I don't want someone to feel bad because they tried it. They're part of the team. Everyone signs up to try something, and I don't want to penalize someone who picked the wrong or was assigned the one or two projects that didn't quite work out initially. They might work out in the end.
Just on that, like, where do you draw your inspiration from?
I have a small network of very trusted colleagues, previous colleagues, and good friends for that. So I really turn to them to get advice on that. I try to pick up sort of tips wherever I can. So whether it's, like the fireside chat series from Crowdlinker, there's always an idea or two I can pick up. Sometimes I might have to sift through a fair amount of noise to get to that one gem. So I might have to make decisions about where to focus on, but I try to read, like good, if I see someone recommend something that's good to read, I look at that and see what I can take out of it. And sometimes it might be that I don't have the opportunity to take advantage of that right now, but then I'll just file it away. So I actually have a reading folder in my email that I archive everything that possibly could be of benefit in the future. So I can look it up again later. If it's a website, it might be better off to print out the page in case they take down the page. So you have a printed version of it. But anything that I might want to draw on that I don't think I'll remember later, it's always good to keep in mind. I mean, I have ideas that I am thinking I can deploy today that I might have come up with in previous companies that I never got the chance to use. But just, I think, as it's mentioned, right, being ready to take advantage of an opportunity, the more tools I have to take advantage of an opportunity, the better. So that increases my chances. It's a very probabilistic way of doing things. But, if I take 20 bets at 10% chance of success, I have a good chance of success versus taking 2 bets at 80%. I think I might prefer the 20 bets at 10%.
You have a very mathematical approach to your decision making. It's very interesting. Cool. I just have a couple more questions, Kin, and then we could wrap up. These are kind of more quick fire, rapid answer kind of questions. I just have 2 or 3. What is something innovation leaders should stop doing, like right away, starting tomorrow?
Stop doing? I think thinking that there's only one solution, like they have one very crystal clear cut, like, I said, A, B, C, D. These are the 4 steps to succeed. I would never want to be that confident that it's A, B, C, D. It could be multiple paths to get to D, or it could be A, B, C, E, right? The outcome could be very different, but being open to that, I think, gives you a better chance of succeeding if you have multiple ways to succeed.
Okay. And what should they start doing right away, like aside from that?
Looking at assessing, where the constraints would be. Sometimes constraints are good because you actually can be more creative if you have enough constraints, right? Like, I like to use this example. If someone told me to write a song, I don't know where to start. But then if you told me a genre, a subject matter, maybe some instruments, I can actually be very creative in that, given those constraints. So, actually looking at what constraints you have and then which ones are you're going to live with and which ones you want to get rid of. And then that's your solution space, right? And then I think sometimes we just have to say we are comfortable passing on an opportunity that's outside our solution space.
And last question, what would you recommend about sharpening an innovation mindset? Like you mentioned a few already. Any kind of tips or suggestions for the audience in terms of how to sharpen your innovation mindset?
I think just continuously learning, right? I think I take an approach where if I don't know how to do something, as long as I know someone has done it, then I don't view it as something that's out of scope for what we can do. There's a solution to it. I've seen it. I may not know how to do it. Somebody out there does, right? Maybe we can learn it from research. Maybe I can find it on a YouTube video, for example, right? Or it might be a bit more proprietary and you got to do a bit of reverse engineering. But I just generally think of what I need to do and then whether it's possible, not whether I know how to do it. And I think sometimes we limit ourselves based on what we know how to do and say, I only know how to do this. Like I only have a hammer and a screwdriver. So these are the only I'm only going to look at nails and screws, right? But I look at, well, I don't know how to use a drill, but I might be able to learn from somebody or, different tools. So be open to that, I think.
Okay, awesome. This is Kin, thank you so much. It's been amazing hearing your journey, your experience, and sharing it with us. I really, really appreciate it. So thanks so much. I'm sure the audience is going to find it very valuable as well. So thank you so much. And thanks for joining our series.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And actually I've been following the series, so I'm very excited to see the rest of it.
Awesome. Well, we got a great lineup, and great segue into my last point. The next episode that we're going to have is going to be with Christian Maxisi. He's the director of strategy and innovation at Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, which is the largest sports entertainment company in Canada, and I think in even North America. And he's going to be talking about driving the spirit of innovation within their organization. So stay tuned for that.